It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday morning. Flight 237 from Minneapolis to Chicago was boarding. Business travelers tucked laptops into their bags. Families wrangled children and strollers. The air carried that familiar pre-flight rhythm. The soft hum of jet engines outside. The static-laced announcements about boarding groups. The sighs of people who had done this routine too many times before. But behind the thin curtain of routine, something else was stirring. Something no one on that flight could have anticipated. Because on this morning, body camera footage would capture a scene so surreal, so unsettling, that it would spread across social media within hours. A uniformed pilot being pulled off his own flight, accused of being intoxicated. And as you're about to see, this wasn't just about one man, one mistake, or one flight. This story would unravel a web of hidden pressures, overlooked warning signs, and dark truths about the aviation world that few dare to talk about. Before we dive deep, remember, if you're drawn into stories where routine moments twist into nightmare revelations, subscribe and stay with me until the end. Because the real shock in this case doesn't come at the start. It comes at the very last moment. The footage begins almost quietly. A police officer follows behind airport staff as they stride toward the crew lounge. The pilot, Captain Thomas Avery, 47 years old, had been spotted minutes earlier by a flight attendant. She said his stride was uneven. His voice, usually crisp and commanding, slurred just enough to raise alarms. In the footage, the officer's camera captures Avery as he stands up from a chair in the lounge. His uniform is pressed. His captain's bars gleam. His tie is perfectly knotted. But his eyes tell a different story, glassy, unfocused, searching for clarity that refuses to come. Captain Avery, one of the officers, says calmly, "We've had some concerns raised. Can you step with us for a moment?" Avery hesitates. His jaw tightens. He straightens his back, as if years of discipline could will away suspicion. "I'm fine," he says firmly. But even in those two words, the slur lingers. The passengers at gate C-14 are oblivious. They're sipping coffee, scrolling through phones, waiting to be called for boarding. None of them know their pilot, the man meant to carry 164 lives into the air, is being questioned. Right then, just steps away. And what happens next would not just end a career. It would ignite questions that aviation authorities would rather keep quiet. But how did it come to this? To understand the footage, you have to know the man. Thomas Avery had been flying for over 2 decades. Colleagues called him steady. Passengers called him professional. But those closest to him knew there was another side. Divorced 3 years earlier, Avery had spiraled quietly. The drinking began at home, alone, after flights. Then it crept into nights before duty days. Always hidden, always controlled, or so he thought. Friends recall that he carried himself with military precision, but there was a hollowness beneath. One colleague put it this way: he could command a cockpit, but when he was on the ground, it was like he was always falling. The airline's policies were clear: 0 tolerance for alcohol within 8 hours of duty. Random checks existed. Yet, like many in the industry quietly admitted, the system was built on trust more than enforcement. And on this Tuesday morning, trust was about to fracture. The footage shows Avery being escorted through a side hallway, away from passengers. He protests softly at first, then louder. "This is ridiculous," he mutters. "You're embarrassing me." But the officers remain calm. In a small room, a breathalyzer is produced. The body cam captures his hand trembling as he takes it. He exhales. The machine beeps. A pause. A number flashes. The officers exchange looks. The reading is above the legal limit for driving, far above what aviation rules allow. A silence lingers in the room. Avery stares at the machine, then at the floor. His career, decades of service, thousands of hours logged, teeters in that silence. But the story doesn't end there, because what the investigation would uncover next would shake the airline, the union, and even federal regulators. Was Avery just one man who slipped, or part of a deeper, darker problem? Flying isn't just a job, it's a life lived at 35,000 feet, under pressure most people can't fathom. Jet lag, sleepless nights in hotel rooms, the responsibility of lives, every single flight. Studies show pilots struggle with depression and substance use at rates far higher than admitted publicly. Yet an unspoken code lingers. Don't admit weakness. Don't seek help. Don't risk the license. Avery had confided once to a colleague, just once, that sometimes he drank to quiet the noise. That noise was the weight of divorce, debt, and the endless grind of schedules that left him hollowed out. The footage, raw as it was, exposed more than just one man's failing. It hinted at an industry that punishes weakness, even as it quietly breeds it. And as reporters would soon discover, Avery wasn't the only one. Back at Gate C-14, rumors began to swirl. A flight attendant whispered to another. Word trickled down. The captain was delayed. Then the announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize. Your flight is canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Groans echoed. Businessmen cursed under their breath. Families scrambled for alternatives. No one knew the truth, that their pilot had been pulled for intoxication. But a passenger did record a snippet. Avery, escorted past the gate, his face pale, his steps unsteady, flanked by officers. The clip hit social media within hours. Headlines exploded. Bodycam footage shows intoxicated pilot pulled from flight to Chicago. The world had seen the uniform, the bars on his shoulder, the stumble in his step, and once the footage spread, there was no turning back. But who first raised the alarm? And why would that witness's testimony change everything? Her name was Emily Torres, a flight attendant with 6 years at the airline. She was the one who'd first noticed Avery that morning. The slurred speech, the strange gait. But what the public didn't know was that Torres had noticed him before. Weeks earlier, on another flight, she'd caught a faint smell on his breath. Not enough to be sure, not enough to risk reporting, but enough to make her stomach twist. When she saw him again that morning, something inside her snapped. She thought about her own children, about the 164 passengers boarding, and she made the call. But by stepping forward, Torres wasn't just reporting a colleague. She was breaking an unspoken rule. Protect the crew, protect the image. Her decision would make her a hero to some, a traitor to others, and it would put her in the crosshairs of a powerful union determined to shield its own. Within days, the pilots' union released a statement. They urged the public not to rush to judgment. They raised questions about the testing process, about Avery's rights. Behind closed doors, though, the pressure was different. Torres received cold stares from colleagues, whispers in crew lounges, messages that said, "You should have handled this internally." But Torres held firm. "I'd rather be hated by a few than see hundreds of lives risked," she said. What she didn't know was that her testimony would open a file investigators had kept buried. Reports of other pilots flagged in recent years. Some caught before flights, some never caught at all. And when journalists began digging, what they uncovered was explosive. Records showed Avery was not the first, not even the second. In the past 5 years, multiple pilots across the country had been pulled for suspicion of intoxication. Some cases never made headlines, settled quietly. Careers ended with medical retirements. Files sealed. The footage of Avery, so visceral and undeniable, cracked the seal wide open. How many flights had been risked? How many times had trust been blind? And here's where the story twists again. Because while Avery was being processed in a holding room, investigators made a discovery in his bag, one that suggested this wasn't just about drinking. Something darker was at play. The officers searched his carry-on. Inside, among the neatly folded shirts and logbook, they found several prescription bottles. Some weren't in his name. The body cam captures the moment. One officer holds up the bottles. "These yours?" Avery doesn't answer. His lips tremble. His eyes close. Later analysis would confirm it. Avery had been mixing alcohol with medications, sedatives and anti-anxiety pills. A dangerous cocktail. But even that wasn't the end. Because tucked inside one of the bottles was a folded slip of paper. A note, a name, and a number that would pull this case into territory no one expected. The note bore the name of another pilot, a close friend of Avery's, a man with his own shadowed past. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't an isolated spiral. It was a circle, a quiet network of struggling pilots, passing around pills in silence, all while carrying lives through the skies. The footage that had shocked the world was just the doorway. Beyond it lay a question that shook passengers everywhere. How safe are we, really, when we step onto a plane? And more hauntingly, how many pilots are flying right now, hiding the same secrets? As Avery sat in custody, stripped of his wings, reporters pressed the airline for answers. They denied knowledge. The union stayed silent. Torres, the whistleblower, feared for her job. But behind the scenes, investigators were already building a case, not just against Avery, but against a hidden culture inside aviation that thrived on silence, denial, and cover-ups. And then, 1 week later, another pilot at a different airline was pulled in almost identical circumstances. Coincidence? Or the sign of something far bigger? The footage played on loop for a week, and the world moved on. But airports don't forget. Terminals keep the echoes of hurried apologies, of canceled flights, of disbelief that comes out like a cough and then lingers like a stain. The gate agents at C-14 learned to smile again. Emily Torres learned to keep her head down. Captain Thomas Avery learned to count time by the hum of fluorescent lights and the scratch of a key in a holding room door. And then it happened again. Different airline, different city, same look in the eyes of a man who once believed control was his birthright. Only this time, the story refused to repeat itself cleanly. Because the second pilot didn't fail his test, he vanished before he could take it. Denver, just after dawn. A thin frost on the windows of the crew lot, the kind that cracks when a palm presses against it. Passengers headed to Phoenix, to business, to funerals, to second chances. The pilot's name showed up on an operations alert. Captain Dana McCall, 49, praised for calm in storms so vicious a lesser crew would have turned back. Gate agents watched a quiet tug-of-war between a duty manager and 2 airport police. A flight attendant whispered that McCall didn't sound right on the crew bus, that she smelled something she didn't want to smell again. McCall nodded when asked to step aside, smiling the smile professionals learn to wear when their spine is burning. "Of course," she said, voice steady. They walked her toward a side corridor where the light flickered and the floor smelled like a mop and industrial soap. The corridor bent left. The officers turned with it. By the time they reached the small testing room, the captain was gone. The door at the end of the corridor had been propped with a fold of cardboard so thin it looked like a shadow. Outside, a stairwell descended to a service level that connected to the labyrinth of baggage tunnels and deliveries and forgotten doors that opened onto the kind of places people only discover when they need to disappear. Security reviewed tapes. They saw a flash of Navy uniform, a glint of captain's bars, a copy of a face at an angle cameras aren't built to love. The union called it a misunderstanding. The airline called it a personnel matter. Somewhere underground, cold air moved and a footstep echoed twice. The system that caught Avery could not catch a ghost. Emily didn't want to be famous. Not like this. Fame made you thinner and louder and more alone. After the video, she changed her route from the crew lot to the lounge. She got used to the sound of her name said in a way that meant problem, not person. Her first threatening message arrived as a voicemail left at 3:12 a.m., that hour when the world feels like a dare. "Hope the extra attention is worth it," a man's voice said, casual as a shrug. "Pilots don't forget, Emily. Crews don't forget. Planes remember." She took the recording to an FAA investigator named Nia Rahman, who had met her once already in a conference room with a dead plant and a window that looked at another window. Rahman was not what Emily expected. Short, steady, the kind of gaze that made people stop performing and start confessing. "Good you brought this," Rahman said, slipping the phone into an evidence bag. "You'll keep getting them. People hate the person who changes the rules, even when they say they want the rules changed." Emily felt the room tilt, that quiet drift that comes when you realize the floor is not what you thought it was. "Are there more cases?" she asked. "Avery can't be the first." Rahman didn't look at her. "He isn't. And the second pilot? Denver." Rahman's mouth tightened like a suture. "We don't talk about active inquiries. What if the inquiry is going to get someone killed?" Silence. Long enough to learn its shape. At last, Rahman said, "If you hear from anyone connected to Avery, anyone, call me first." Emily nodded, and the nod felt like a promise she didn't know how to keep. That night, a new message appeared, not a threat, but an invitation signed with a name Emily recognized from a folded note in a bottle. They met in a diner designed to look like it was older than it was. Booths the color of bruised cherries. A waitress who called everyone Han, so evenly it sounded like a spell. His name was Jacob Rusk. Same age as Avery, same years of service, same habit of speaking softly even when the room could handle more sound. He kept his captain's hat on the seat beside him, like a pet that had forgotten how to behave. "I shouldn't have called," he said before the coffee landed. "But you were the only one who did something." Emily watched steam curl from the cup. "You were the note," she said, "in Avery's bag." He laughed a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "Yeah, the note. That's all I am now." "What did you want him to know?" "That I was done." He traced the rim of his mug with a fingertip, the nail clean and clipped to regulation. "Done pretending nothing hurts. Done with the hours they call legal because paperwork says so, and the pills we call helpful because they come in orange bottles, and the whiskey we call sleep because it's what happens after it." "Did you give him the pills?" "No," he said, too quickly, the way a man jumps away from a stove. "We pass things around sometimes. Not pills, phone numbers, mostly. Clinics that didn't ask questions. Doctors who heard anxiety and wrote relief. But that day, Tom was different. He said he had something to show me. Proof. Proof of what? That the airline scheduling wasn't just tight. It was illegal. Pilot hours. Falsified rest logs. A system that sanded off the corners of the law until it looked smooth enough to sign. Emily felt the coffee cool untouched in front of her. "Where is it? The proof?" "I don't know." He looked at her like a man looking at the wing in a storm. "We were supposed to meet after his morning flight. He didn't make it to the runway." He slid a napkin across the table. On it, a time, a place, a name that didn't belong to any pilot. "He told me if anything happened, I should talk to this person." "Who is it?" Jacob's eyes flicked toward the door, toward the window, toward the hat that meant he still belonged to the sky. "Someone who knows why 2 minutes of body camera footage from that morning are gone." Emily didn't believe in missing time until she saw how carefully this time had been cut. Officer Miguel Wren wore his uniform like a compromise. The camera on his chest blinked its record light in the old video of that morning. Emily had seen the public clip, Avery called aside, the breathalyzer, that awful pause. Wren had seen the same clip and saw something else. The moment his camera stuttered, half a heartbeat too long. He met Emily in an empty concourse he said was under renovation. The floor swallowed their steps. The air smelled like sawdust and old gum. He held out a thumb drive like a guilty offering. "I didn't steal it," he said. "I just didn't turn it in. Not this copy. Before it got processed." Emily's hand shook as she took it. "Why?" Wren's answer walked the line between courage and fear. "Because I like sleeping, and I don't like knowing I could have stopped something and didn't." They watched together on his old laptop. The video started where the public one did. Officers' approach, the soft demand, the quiet refusal. But there was a sliver more. A minute and 43 seconds between the escort from the lounge and the testing room. In that sliver, a man in a suit stepped into the frame. Not a cop, not a captain. A face Emily recognized from corporate emails and airport TV screens. The airline's regional vice president, Barrett Lane. A man who never met a microphone, he didn't offer a smile. Lane angled his body so the camera saw his shoulder, not his mouth. His voice slid down the corridor anyway. "Tom," he said gently, "let's not make a circus. We can handle this internally." Avery's voice was smaller, embarrassed, maybe relieved. "Barrett, Shoo," Lane said with the intimacy of a hand on a shoulder. "You're tired. Tough month. Take a medical. We'll reassign. No need for theatrics." Wren paused the video, scrubbed forward 2 seconds, played again. A clink, glass on metal, a hiss like a bottle cap freed. Lane's shoulder lifted as if his hand did something the camera wasn't built to catch. "Take a sip?" he murmured. "Barrett, I can't." "You already did." The frame wobbled. Wren had shifted his weight. maybe stepped closer, maybe only thought he should. Lane glanced at the camera, then away. The light blinked red, and then the public version resumed, as if someone had taken scissors to the morning. Emily stared until the progress bar reached the end. They gave him a drink, she said, the sentence ash in her mouth. Ren shook his head. Maybe, maybe not. That sound could be anything. But the cut? That cut's not a battery failure. That's a decision. If someone had staged a failure, it meant the test wasn't proof. It was a plan. Ramon listened without interrupting as Emily laid out the napkin from the diner. The minute 43, the shoulder that knew where the lens was. The investigator's pen moved without looking down, lines where other people wrote words. We found a common thread, Ramon said when Emily ran out of breath. Pilots flagged for impairment in the last 18 months. Avery, and 3 others you don't know. Each had visited a clinic called Lakeside Wellness within 60 days of their incidents. Emily swallowed. The name sounded like a promise. Promises made her suspicious now. Lakeside specializes in aviation medicals. Ramon continued. They process fast. They advertise discreet. Their lead physician is an AME, authorized to certify fitness to fly. And you think they, what, rubber stamp? I think they treat bodies as paperwork, Ramon said, and paperwork as a chess piece. Emily saw it then. The arrow from exhaustion to appointment, from appointment to prescription, from prescription to the kind of relief that isn't relief at all. You think Avery had proof the airline was breaking hours rules, she said. You think someone needed him to disappear from the conversation. Ramon's lips pressed into a line. Disappearance can mean many things. A medical leave, a quiet retirement, a spectacular public disgrace. McCall from Denver, Emily said. She vanished. Ramon nodded once, and then she reappeared, quietly cleared, transferred to a non-flying role while she recovers from stress. The union called it compassionate. And what do you call it? I call it containment. Because if you contain the visible fire, people don't look for the gas line that runs under the house. A journalist named Caleb Ng worked like he was being timed. He didn't sleep because stories didn't sleep. He didn't wait because the people in the stories couldn't afford waiting. He called Emily not because he wanted to use her, but because he understood that she was already being used by people who wouldn't put their names on the emails they sent. This came to me, he said, forwarding a PDF that looked like a photocopy of a secret, and signed. No metadata, but the formatting screams, internal. The letter detailed a fatigue mitigation pilot program at North River Airlines, Avery's company, meant to reconcile operational demands with limited crew availability. That was corporate, for we need more flights than we have rested pilots. The letter encouraged creative logging within legal bounds. It referenced a software tool that allocated buffer compliance dynamically. Emily didn't need translation anymore. She knew what a buffer was and what it meant to allocate compliance like it was something you could assign. Caleb pulled up data he'd scraped from public flight records. Look, he said. Turnaround times tightened over the last year on their regional routes. Rest intervals shaved by minutes that don't matter to passengers and matter to pilots more than breath. What happens if we publish? We get sued by a company that cares a lot about its share price, Caleb said, almost cheerfully. Or we get a quote from them about how safety is their highest priority and their pilots are heroes. Or both. And if we don't, then we wait for a bigger story to write itself. He paused, the quiet alive with the rustle of paper, the blink of a cursor. Emily, he said, voice softer. Avery tried to hand you a baton without you knowing it. You can drop it. No one will blame you. Or you can run. She thought of the minute 43, of the clink, of Lane's shoulder finding the exact angle where truth couldn't see. I don't run, she said. I fly. Caleb grinned into the phone. Good, because there's one more thing we haven't talked about. What? The death. She froze. Who? An AME associated with Lakeside Wellness. Car accident on a bridge 2 nights ago. Police called it a blowout. But the tire was new. If the doctor who cleared the pilots died, the paper trail died with him, unless someone kept a copy he wasn't supposed to keep. Lakeside Wellness looked like a spa wearing a lab coat. Water wall. Chairs so white they made you check your shoes. A receptionist whose smile had angles. Emily didn't go in. She sat in the coffee shop across the parking lot and watched the door. She told herself she wasn't a detective. Then she took notes like a detective takes notes. Times, faces, badges clipped to belts. A woman in navy emerged with a canvas tote stamped with the clinic's logo and a binder that didn't fit inside. She moved like she didn't want to be seen moving. Emily followed from a distance so respectful it felt like a lie. The woman turned into a smaller building behind the main one. An annex with frosted windows and a keypad. The door opened, closed, opened again. A man stepped out carrying a banker's box like a man carries something that used to be simple and had become complicated. He almost dropped it when he saw Emily. She wasn't blocking his path. She wasn't even looking right at him. But he had the posture of someone who believed he would be seen, and that belief made it so. "I don't know you," he said. "You don't," she agreed. "You can't be here." "I'm just having coffee," she said, holding up the empty cup. He stared a second longer than was polite, and in that second Emily saw fear turn into calculation. He set the box on the hood of his car, rummaged, pulled out a file folder. "Do you know how many people call me a good man?" he asked, and his voice had the exhaustion of a confession delivered too late. "I've cleared men who fell asleep at their kitchen table and woke up in a cockpit smiling. I believed them. I believed me." He pushed the folder toward her. She looked down and saw copies of medical certificates, rest logs, and a list handwritten on lined paper. Names, dates, dosages, initials she recognized. Avery's among them. "What do you want me to do with this?" she asked. "Make it mean something before someone makes me disappear." He slid the box into his trunk and drove away like a man who had finally decided to run. Emily opened the folder to the page with Avery's initials and a date that made her throat tighten. The day before the flight to Chicago. A prescription for an anti-anxiety medication with a dosage that should have grounded him. A note, unsigned, unletterheaded, clearing him anyway under a clause that did not exist. If that clause didn't exist, someone invented it, and someone powerful had approved the invention. The Union Hall had carpets designed to hide coffee stains and arguments. The room was full before the meeting started. Pilots stood along the back wall, arms crossed, expressions carved from the same stone the industry had built its legend on. The Union chair, a man named Coulson who looked like he'd been cast to be trusted, rapped a gavel he didn't need to rap. "We are a family," he said, voice carrying. "But families disagree." A chorus of low mutters. The phrase had been overused until it meant you will not like what happens next. "We support Captain Avery," Coulson continued. "We support Captain McCall. We support every member unfairly maligned by a media cycle hungry for blood." A hand shot up. Jacobs. Emily hadn't expected him to be here. She hadn't expected him to be the first to speak. "What about supporting the people who said something before a tragedy forced us to?" he asked. "What about the members whose bodies are telling them they're not okay, and whose rent is telling them to keep quiet?" Coulson's smile thinned into strategy. "We have resources." "Do we?" Jacob asked. "Or do we have pamphlets? Because I've been handing out pamphlets for years, and I've never seen a pamphlet talk a pilot out of a pill." Laughter that wasn't laughter. A few claps that weren't claps. Coulson held up a hand. "Brother Rusk, this is not the venue for accuse." Then Jacob said the word everyone had come to pretend they wouldn't say. "Cover up." The air changed. Not colder, not warmer, closer. As if molecules had decided to lean in. Coulson's gavel found the wood with a crack. "Meeting adjourned," he announced prematurely, and that, more than the word, told everyone where the fault line ran. Emily stepped toward Jacob through the bobbing of shoulders and backs and whispered apologies. His mouth was a line, his eyes the color of a storm that hadn't picked a direction yet. "You shouldn't have said it," she said softly. "I should have said it 3 years ago." He exhaled. "It won't matter anyway." "Why?" He didn't answer. He just handed her a set of keys and said, "If anything happens to me, there's a locker at North River Storage. Unit E-109. Code is the anniversary of the day I stopped sleeping." He didn't tell her the date. He didn't have to. The date was written across his face. The news alert came like a flicker. Pilot found dead in apparent suicide. No name, no airline, no picture. Emily called Caleb. Caleb called the coroner's office. Ramon called a number she pretended she didn't have. The name came back like a blade with the tip broken off. Ragged, cruel. Jacob Rusk. A note at the scene, and signed, saying he was tired. The kind of sentence anyone could have written about anyone alive. Emily drove to the bridge and stood where the guardrail had been straightened already, as if the world had decided to erase the bend at once. She stared at the water and didn't cry. Her body had chosen a different ceremony. Her hands trembled so hard her keys chimed. Ramon found her there. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded like she meant it because she did. He said if anything happened, Emily murmured, holding up the keys. Ramon looked at the water, then at Emily's face. "Then let's not let anything be the last word." They drove in a silence that wasn't empty. The storage facility smelled like oil and cardboard and secrets. Unit E-109 yawned open behind a rolling door that rattled like a throat clearing. Inside, boxes labeled with a pilot's precise handwriting. Logbooks, clipped articles, one duffel bag that didn't fit the neatness. Emily opened it and found a breathalyzer, a mini bottle of whiskey with a hotel bar's logo, and a body camera that was not an airport-issue model. She pressed play. The date stamp, Avery's morning. The lens looked out from a shelf in the crew lounge. It saw faces in conversation, captured hands without names, recorded laughter that was friendly because the alternative would have been honest. Then it saw Barrett Lane walk in with a smile other men mirrored as muscle memory. It recorded his hand reaching for a cup that wasn't his. It recorded a thin stream of liquid poured from a container with no label into coffee that belonged to a man who believed he was among colleagues. It recorded a whisper, "Just relax, Tom." And then, as if the camera knew it was witnessing the moment the future would hinge on, it recorded Lane taking the cup himself and sipping, lips barely touching the rim, proof that what was inside could not, by itself, be poison. Emily sat on the concrete floor and held the camera like a relic. "He set him up," she said. Ramon shook her head. "He staged a context. If a toxicology report shows alcohol and benzos, they'll say it was self-administered. They'll say a sip is not a crime. They'll say anything that makes the worst thing look like the expected thing." Ramon exhaled through her nose. "But this is the kind of almost nothing that makes everything else wobble. If a sip could be explained, the cut in the body cam could not, and together, they drew the outline of a decision dressed as an accident." Caleb's story dropped at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, the exact time executives hate because it ruins breakfast and makes the phones ring before anyone has had the chance to lie well. The headline didn't accuse. It asked, what happened in the missing minutes? The subhead braided fatigue, clinic, and corporate pressure into a question that would not be answered by the phrase, "Safety is our highest priority." Barrett Lane held a press conference under lights designed to make skin look honest. "Our pilots are the backbone of our company," he said, every syllable buffed to a mirror finish. "We care deeply about their well-being." He accepted questions and answered none. He promised transparency and provided glass that fogged when breath touched it. He said the word family 3 times because media training had taught him that people forget facts but not words that they associate with dinner. A shareholder meeting scheduled for later that week was moved up and moved behind closed doors. Inside, a lawyer explained how to reduce risk without reducing flights. Someone said optics. Someone else said optics cost less than safety. The room hummed with the sound of a company learning how to sound concerned without changing shape. Outside, pilots read Caleb's story on their phones and didn't speak unless they were sure the person beside them would not repeat what they said. A mechanic looked at a plane and thought about human bodies as machines that only tell the truth when you put your ear right up to them. Emily sat in her car in the parking garage, the kind of place people go to be between decisions. She dialed a number she'd been given by a friend of a friend. The number belonged to an attorney who specialized in whistleblowers who hadn't meant to become whistleblowers. "Do you want to sue?" the attorney asked. "I want to live," Emily said. "Sometimes those are the same answer," the attorney replied. "Sometimes they're not." Before Emily could pick, her phone lit with a message that made Choice feel late. It arrived from a number that did not exist. Words black on white, as thin and calm as a pilot's voice on a bad day. You're asking the wrong question. It's not who made Avery drink. It's who needed him tested in public. Look at the audit logs for gate access. Look at who moved his report off the server the night before. 5 dots blinked, stopped, blinked. A last line arrived like a hand pressed over her mouth. If you keep going, watch the clouds. They're not the only things that will gather. Emily forwarded the message to Ramon, to Caleb, to the attorney whose name she had already forgotten and whose number she couldn't afford to lose. Then she drove to the airport, not because she had to be there, but because she didn't know where else men like Lane could be made to look small. She found Officer Wren in a hallway that had learned her footsteps. He took her to a terminal room with a terminal name, Access Control, and showed her logs that spoke in numbers and dates and codes that meant door opened, door closed, badge accepted, badge denied. Avery's badge opened the crew lounge at 4:57 a.m. Lane's opened it at 5:04. A third badge opened at 4:53 and did not belong to either man. The name matched a contractor whose job was to restock coffee and replace the little lids that looked like hats for cups. For minutes before Avery, 2 minutes after the contractor left, a janitorial key opened the same door. The contractor's van, when reviewed on camera, had an extra passenger no one signed in, a face turned away, a cap low. Wren's mouth moved around a word that didn't come out. Inside job, he said finally, as if the phrase could hold still. Or outside men hired to look inside, Emily said. She stared at the timestamp 4:53 until it burned. Who pulled Avery's report? Wren typed. The server showed a user with admin privileges that should have been controlled like a nuclear code. The name made Emily feel giddy and furious in the same thought. Barrett Lane. Before she could speak, an alert crawled along the top of the screen in red. Wren squinted. Security incident, he said, at the Lakeside Annex. Emily didn't realize she had started moving until she was already running. By the time they reached the annex, the fire had learned too much about air. The fire department called it contained before the smoke figured out where to go. Someone had known which sprinklers to sabotage and which doors to leave ajar, and which records to move from paper to ash without letting flames leap to the places insured under policies that scolded, not comforted. Ramon stood outside the tape and watched the building bleed gray. The doctor died 2 nights ago, she murmured. The annex burns tonight. The company denies everything in the morning. It's almost elegant. Emily stared at the glass shards glittering like applause. Elegant is the word we use when something ugly is done without noise. They all turned when a lakeside receptionist, Angles and Smile now melted to shock, staggered into view. She clutched a single accordion folder she had saved not because she had intended to be brave, but because her hands had grabbed the thing closest to her instinct to hold. Inside, fragmentary backups, misfiled printouts, a copy of a memo from Barrett Lane's office to Lakeside referencing coordination to ensure operational continuity. The line that mattered most lived in a parenthetical that looked like it had been added after too many emails at 1 a.m. Visibility event may be necessary to catalyze policy justification. Ensure clinical narrative supports public framing. Caleb read it and whistled a note that didn't know what song it wanted. Visibility event, he repeated. A public scandal as leverage. They wanted a headline to justify a policy change. Ramon's jaw locked. They didn't need a drunk pilot, she said. They needed a pilot who looked like one. They needed to film a villain to sell the solution they were already paying lawyers to write. Emily thought of Avery's hands, steady around a cup that wasn't his. She thought of Jacob's keys and the bridge with the straightened guardrail. She thought of a union meeting and a gavel that tried to end a sentence by making noise. Publish it, she told Caleb. I will, he said. But first, one more call. He dialed a number that answered on the first ring, and Emily heard the one voice she had been waiting to see run out of words. Barrett Lane's voice held up fine under microphones. Phones were different. Phones tilled a man's sentences and brought the roots up. Caleb put him on speaker, and the lobby of the fire-tired annex turned into a courtroom no judge could adjourn. Mr. Lane, Caleb said, polite like a pickpocket. Do you have a comment on internal memos referencing a visibility event? That phrase is taken out of context. Lane replied smoothly. We prioritize safety. Any suggestion otherwise is defamatory. What context would make it acceptable to plan a public spectacle of impairment? I don't accept your premise, Lane said. That silver way people say I refuse to answer without sounding like I refuse to answer. Were you in the crew lounge with Captain Avery on the morning of his removal? Our executives frequently visit crew areas to support our team members. Did you pour anything into Captain Avery's coffee? A pause. A soft click. Lane switching to the kind of silence lawyers teach. I will not dignify conspiracy theories, he said finally. What about the minute and 43-second gap in the body cam footage? Technical glitches occur. Do you have admin access to the server that stored Avery's report? Our IT practices are secure and within industry standards. Did you or someone under your direction remove his report the night before his shift? This conversation is over. The line went dead, and for a second nobody spoke, as if words were a finite resource and they had spent too many. Caleb looked at Ramon, then at Emily. He didn't deny being there. He didn't deny the gap. He didn't deny the access. He just denied meaning. Ramon folded the memo and slid it into her jacket like a blade. Meaning is what we make, she said, and what a jury buys. Before any jury could hear anything, a new sound found them, that brittle, cruel chime of a breaking story that arrives as a breaking plane. Phones lit up. An alert bloomed across screens with the indifference of code. North River Airlines Flight 582, declaring emergency. Possible pressurization issue. Rapid descent en route St. Louis to Boston. Emily didn't breathe for 2 beats. She had never learned how to breathe when the sky was in trouble. She clicked a live tracker and watched a dot become a line that bent too sharply. Ramon was already on her phone, her voice stripping courtesy down to the metal. What's the tail number? Who's the captain? When was their last medical? Where did they sleep last night and who signed their rest log? And is that signature attached to an IP address that doesn't live where it says it lives? Caleb's fingers flew on his keyboard, pulling schedules, matching names, mapping routes to clinics, clinics to memos, memos to men whose shoulders knew where cameras looked. Captain, he said, reading. Names familiar. Emily's throat closed on its own name. Then she forced it open and read the roster over his shoulder. The captain of Flight 582 had cleared a medical at Lakeside 3 weeks earlier under the Rapid Review program. The first officer's name, Small, a line you could miss, was a name that made Emily's palms go cold. D. McCall. Dana, the pilot who had vanished in Denver and then been reassigned to a non-flying role while she recovered from stress. What is she doing on that plane? Emily asked, voice the size of a pin. Ramon didn't answer. She was listening to another phone, held to her other ear, 1 line for action, 1 for panic. They're descending to 10,000, she said softly. They're stable for now. For now, Caleb whispered. For now. He kept typing like typing could keep a plane in the air. Emily stared at the screen until the line straightened. For a moment that hurt, it looked like hope. Then the transponder flickered. A heartbeat, 2, 3, gone. The dot went gray. There is a kind of quiet that only airports know. The kind when people still move because moving is what bodies do. But the part of them that believes in gravity has decided to hold its breath. Emily's phone chimed. A new message, same number that did not exist. You wanted truth. Truth doesn't land softly. Check the roster for Flight 237 tomorrow. Look who's been cleared to return. She opened the roster with fingers she could not feel. The name loaded slow, as if the internet had decided mercy was a function it could sometimes perform. Captain Thomas Avery, returned to duty, administrative review complete. The room moved. The world moved. The dot did not. Outside, the sky kept its color like it always does when it's about to change. And somewhere between St. Louis and Boston, a plane that had promised to land decided to teach everyone watching the most expensive lesson in visibility any company could buy.